Hello, I'm Jessica Daniel, filling in for Elizabeth Astor. Thank you for gathering with us here in Boulder, Colorado, in the meditation hall of the Hemera Foundation. And Reggie, thank you for being here with us again to offer teachings to our global online community. An audience member wrote in last week to express what many of us feel. Reggie, I feel so much gratitude for the cherished opportunity to be with you via this live stream. My life feels like it has actually changed, knowing there is a regular Thursday connection in place. Thank you for opening yourself to all of us in this accessible way and making the opportunity for this relationship a reality. It is a true gift. Before beginning, I'd like to acknowledge that tonight's broadcast was pre-recorded since Reggie and Caroline are out of town. Tonight's questions have been selected from your emails last week. If you have questions about tonight's teaching, please send them in, and we will include them during our live stream with Reggie next week. So now I'll turn it over to you, Reggie.
Thank you, Jessica. So once again, it's wonderful to be with you. And it's exciting to be exploring what I think is a unique and open field for developing community and for furthering the practicing lineage in our world. Tonight I want to work on meditation with you. That's going to be our main thing. I'm going to work on the practice that I gave you last week, but explore it in a little bit more detail. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit more about meditation practice in the practicing lineage. This practicing lineage is it's a term that comes from Tibetan tradition, and it refers to people who are following the Dharma, which in Asian cultures means official Buddhism. It doesn't mean that anymore, but in official Buddhism, the practicing lineage are the people who really understand and emphasize and are loyal to the practice of meditation as the foundation of their life. That everything that they do revolves around meditation practice. Now, one interesting point is that often when we hear that statement that meditation is the basis of everything, meditation is the focal point of life, sometimes in the West we misunderstand what that means. Sometimes we take it to mean that I should spend all my time in meditation practice at home, that I shouldn't necessarily have an engaging relationship life, or I shouldn't have an engaging career, or I shouldn't be a creative person in the world, I shouldn't be an activist, that I should spend my time sitting in a cave and just watching my own mind. And that has never been the viewpoint of the practicing lineage. I know sometimes in our culture there are people who do take it in that direction, but that's not really what we're talking about at all. Our problem in our lives in general, from the viewpoint of the Dharma and particularly of meditation, is that we live in a very small and very, very restricted prison of our own making, which is all of our ideas about who we are and what life is, who other people are. We live almost entirely in our left brain, and we're constantly recycling and recycling the same old ideas. And the problem with living in that way, although we may be in the world, we may be very active, we could be President of the United States, or very important, very famous movie star, we could be a well-known writer. We could even be a spiritual teacher. But the problem with that approach is, actually we're cut off from the world. We're not actually in touch with the world when we take that approach. So we have this problem, this ego problem, this problem of living entirely within our thinking mind, and living in terms of what we think, in terms of what is actually the case. We take our thoughts to be real. We take our assumptions about other people to be how they really are. It's very enervating. It's very debilitating. It's very dehumanizing for ourselves and others to live in that way. But that is the modern way. And all of the tremendous volume of availability of technology and the internet and cell phones, all of our texting, all of our surfing the web, all of our engagement with this vast electronic world reinforces, under normal conditions, it reinforces our imprisonment and leaves us even more disconnected from what is outside this little prison. You could say that the entire modern world and all of its technology and all of its assumptions, with a few exceptions, is happening inside a dungeon, a very small dungeon that we have created particularly over the last few hundred years. And that outside of that dungeon, which most of us can't see, is an infinite world. It is this earth of ours with its rolling hills and its forests. It's the oceans, and it's beyond the oceans into our solar system, and beyond that into space itself. There's a whole world happening out there that we are, most of us, really completely cut off from. You might say, well, what's the problem with this? Why is this? Why can't we just live in this little prison if it pleases us and makes us happy and distracts us and helps us not feel the underlying pain of life and not be depressed by the fact that we're going to die someday? What's the problem with living in that dungeon? The problem, put very simply, is that we as human beings receive our life from what's outside, not from what's inside this dungeon. The dungeon may claim to be all-sufficient, and as we hear often on the internet, people who are very enthusiastic promoters of all the search engines and all the available information, we hear from them that often that all human fulfillment can be found within that world, and within what we're calling this dungeon. But the fact of the matter is, if we, for any reason, are jarred loose from our residence in the dungeon, for example, we have a near-death experience, or someone very close to us dies, or our life blows up in some other way, we have some kind of extraordinary psychological crisis, and we are actually blown out of the dungeon. If we survive, and many of us don't, but if we survive and we pick our head up and we begin to look around, we begin to see that promise of fulfillment within the dungeon is a lie. It's self-serving, and it may further, modern consumerism, and it may make a lot of people rich. But it's a lie. It's not where life is found. We begin to realize that we've actually been cut off from life. I had a woman I knew, who was actually the mother of a close friend of mine many years ago. Her situation was that she had lived within the dungeon her whole life, and she contracted cancer, and she was dying, and she was actually quite close to death when I saw her. And she told me, I went in expecting to find somebody extraordinarily depressed, and I went in to see her. Her name was Diane. And she told me that these months when she had had cancer had been the most opening, the most rewarding, the most fulfilling, and the most life-giving of any period of time in her whole life. And what she said was basically, I've become a different person. And I'm so grateful that finally, before I died, I found out where the true life really is. So the purpose of meditation really for us is to begin to help us pull the plug on this vast conventional left brain world that we live in. Sometimes we take a look at this world and we feel that pulling the plug is an impossibility because it's everywhere. We know people who have jobs where they have to leave their cell phones on all night, and where they're even though their job is a 40-hour work week, they're expected to be texting and checking emails throughout the weekend and on vacations. It's becoming more and more the order of the day. And for many people in many careers, if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to be competitive. We look at examples like that and we begin to feel it's completely and totally hopeless. But it's far from hopeless. It's not hopeless at all, actually. And in a way, the more claustrophobic the situation becomes for us in modern culture, the more dehumanizing it becomes, the more distracting and illness-causing it becomes. In a way, the message of its insufficiency becomes more and more clear to more and more people. What meditation, and we're talking here about somatic meditation, we're not talking about the multitude of left brain versions of meditation that are out there floating around. We're talking about somatic meditation, which is coming into the body, beginning to develop what's called interoception, which means the inner knowledge of the body, the inner awareness of the body, the felt sense of the body. We come into the body and we begin to pay attention to what it feels like to have a body. It may seem like that beginning point is utterly simplistic. And we can say, well, babies have that ability and small children have that ability. It's like, that's not what we're doing. But the interesting point is when we do that, in fact, we are pulling the plug for the period of time during our meditation practice on the entire left brain world. And not just the world that we run into on the internet or on our cell phones, on our computers, in the movies, video games, not just that world, but the entire left brain world is temporarily set aside when we come into our body in this very simple and very direct way that we teach in Dharma Ocean, that I teach, and that is called the ground jnana, the basis of the whole journey, coming into the body and getting to know it from the inside. So we could ask, how does that work? How does that happen? The neurobiology tells us that within the human person we have two ways of knowing things. One way is the left brain way. And the left brain, in this way of looking at it, is the part of ourselves that processes our experience. That an experience arises in our body and the left brain labels it. In other words, it creates a known category into which it fits the experience, and then it begins to add interpretations onto that label. It begins to set it within the framework of our narrative, our life story that we rehearse and repeat to ourselves as humans. And it absorbs the experience into a world of already known concepts, judgments, and discriminations. The experience, which in the beginning was not conceptual, ends up being seen and understood and experienced as being essentially conceptual. So that's one way of knowing, and that is that's the prefrontal cortex. It's the part of human beings that is really different from other mammals and even the primates. The primates do have some prefrontal cortex capacities, but the humans really have developed that through language and through their complex social order. And then there's another way of knowing. And in Buddhism, in the practicing lineage, the left brain way of knowing is called second order knowledge. It's derivative knowledge. It's not actually direct knowledge. It's derivative. But then there's primary knowing, and the primary knowing occurs in the soma. It occurs in the body. It's what the body knows. That kind of knowledge is actually very, very different. And we initially, when we begin meditating, we're not really familiar with the way of knowing that the body incorporates, that the body houses, that the body is. How the body knows, we're not familiar with it. And what the body knows, we're not familiar. And what the language of the body is, we're not familiar. So in the beginning, when we begin to do somatic meditation, we are beginning to become familiar with this other domain of knowing, which is the way of knowing of the body. So when we practice somatic meditation, how does it help us set aside the dominance and the primacy and the dominion of the thinking mind in our life? We're not destroying it, but we're setting it aside. How does that actually work? When we come into our body, we leave aside our conceptual thinking. The mind, the conceptual mind of the left brain thinks, but the body senses, it intuits in a physical way, it feels, it has a general knowingness that has nothing to do with thinking at all. In Buddhism, this kind of knowing is primary knowledge. It is the actual knowledge of our own human experience in a non-conceptual way. It's called sacred experience, it's called sacred outlook, it's called what the Buddha knows. The body is understood as being the body of the Buddha. When we set aside our thinking mind, the body itself abides always and ever in an awakened way. The fundamental knowingness of the body is already and always an awakened knowing. The space in the body is awake and empty of ego. Anything that we experience within that framework is pure, and it's direct, and most important, is liberating. So when we come into the body in that way, and I talk about we are going to run into our naked human experience, our unprocessed human experience, undomesticated, free, and from ego's mind, dangerous. The ego doesn't like unprocessed experience. It wants everything to be run through a meat grinder so it comes out like baby food. That's the ego's approach. But when we touch our body, we're touching something that is fathomless and potentially, from the ego's point of view, wild and dangerous. Nevertheless, strangely enough, when we come into our body, the body is completely okay with its own experience. That's why working with the body is the sine qua non, the essential ingredient in all trauma work. Without working with the body, people are unable to receive and go through and experience and resolve traumas. So the most creative trauma work going on today, always, always, always grounded in the body. When we talk about our experience, sometimes what we don't realize is the body, it's not an internal thing, what the body knows. The body knows what's going on around us. And I'll give you an example that happened the other day with me. A couple of examples, actually. Caroline, my wife, was, who, by the way, has a much better interoception than I do, usually. She'd bought some coffee, and it was a kind of coffee that had chicory mixed in with it. And she thought she'd really like it. And she made the coffee, and she put in her milk, and she took a sip, and something wasn't right. And she looked at me, and she said, I don't know if this is really good for me or not. And I looked at her, and my body goes, I saw this like total, her body was going, no. This total opposition between the coffee and her actual body. And to quote my acupuncturist, his sense of somatic knowingness is unbelievable. He was trained in Chinese, a traditional Chinese acupuncturist, of the old school. And a lot of times I say, well, how did you know that? And he goes, I don't know how I know. I know what I know, but I don't know how I know. And that's how it is with the soma. There is something that comes to you that is just a kind of knowingness. I'll give you another example. We have a dog, and the dog has been scratching himself lately. In fact, his eyes were red, and he's scratching himself. And we're wondering what's going on. We go to the vet, and the vet goes, "Well, he's allergic to something. What do you think it could be?" And we don't know. I don't know. And then Caroline and I noticed that we have this rug in our kitchen. Against the wall we have a couch and a rug. And we notice the dog lies on the rug all the time, but we also notice that nobody else goes near the rug. Nobody wants to sit on the couch and put their feet on this rug. And so Caroline and I are tuning our bodies into the rug, and we get this sort of, sort of yucky, it's like the rug is pushing us back, and the rug is a hostile zone. And that kind of knowledge is incredibly subtle. But once you begin to tune into it, you realize that the body itself is not only, I wouldn't even say very intelligent, I would say it is absolutely intelligent. The body doesn't make mistakes, ever. There are so many books out there now. The body holds the truth, the body knows the answer, the body never forgets. There are all kinds of books by therapists and trauma workers and focusing people. And they're right. The body has this sort of unerring capacity to see. But the body doesn't just see rugs and coffee, it sees people. One of the things we teach in Dharma Ocean is that when we are becoming meditation instructors, it's very, very important, it's essential that we learn how to see and receive other people so we see them in their own light. We see who they really are. And it's not even seeing, in a way, it's the comprehension of our soma of the other. One of the exercises that we're going to do a little bit later in this live streaming series is I'm going to have you use this technique with people that you love and also people you have problems with, meaning seeing what your mind thinks, assessing what your mind thinks about this person, how your thinking mind judges other people, and then coming back and setting yourself within your soma and opening yourself to your soma and seeing what your soma knows. Your soma which is your basic being, it's your Buddha nature, it's your fundamental nature, always knows unerringly the other. It is so interesting to use this practice. You need a little bit of guidance, I think, to do it, but to use it, the things that you find out about other people, and even people who are absolutely the closest to you, it's like a revelation, because your body knows probably 99% more than your memory bank, your judgments, and your thinking mind. But the body doesn't just know other people. The body knows us. The body sees our ego. The body sees the way in which we get activated. The body always knows when we are off, when we have been triggered, when we are bringing some kind of neurotic storyline to a personal encounter. Something painful happens and we spin out. And the body knows instantly, immediately, fully and totally and purely and clearly what just happened. So what happens when we begin to tune into the body is that we are separating ourselves. We're setting aside the whole vast interpretive, judgmental world and functionality of the left brain thinking mind, the ego mind. We are tapping into a way of seeing and a way of knowing that is completely and totally different. The minute you even label what you see with your body, you've lost it. So very important in our work in the practicing lineage is not only to begin to tune into the body and see how it goes, but to be able to stay with the experience of the body. In the practicing lineage, we talk about the different stages of spiritual maturation, human maturation, which are the same thing. Becoming a realized person and becoming a complete and whole human being are the same exact thing. There isn't a hair's breadth of difference. It's just different ways of talking about the same thing. So in the practicing lineage, we talk about these stages of development very similar to a person when they're born, and then they're just lying there, and then they learn to roll over and so on. The first step is always, as I mentioned, and will probably mention until my last breath, is always connecting with the body and training over and over and over to be within the body, to connect with the body, to see, to explore, and to begin to become familiar with the infinite terrain of the body. And then, so that's known as stage 1, we call the ground dhyana. And then stage 2 is we need to learn, as I was just saying, to stay with it. Because the habitual patterns of our ego are always going to be running away. So through the practice of the shikantaza that we started to explore last week, and we're going to also look at a little bit this week, we are going to be able to hopefully come into a presence with the soma, setting aside all of the external involvements and projections of the thinking mind for a period of time, learn to be with it, and begin to become very familiar with how and why and when, under the circumstances under which we run away. As people, we run away from the knowledge of the soma. And then we move on from there. In the third, that's the meditation jhana or meditation stage, and the third one, called somatic descent, which many of you know about, we begin to develop a much more refined ability to hear the very unique idiom and language, the very unique song of the body, if you will, and to allow it to be a guidance in our life. Chogyam Trungpa talked about all these things, but he didn't say much. But there's a very famous article he wrote in the early 70s from a talk called Negativity, Working with Negativity. And in the article he says, the knowledge, the non-conceptual knowledge of the body, it's threatening to ego, it's messy, it's raw and rugged, and it provides the guidelines for our life. If you want to be able to live your life, if you want to grow and unfold your state of being to its maximum potential, be in the body. Learn how to stay with the messiness and the uncertainty and the fear of your own human soma. Give in and let it provide guidelines for your life. That's the third jhana in the practicing lineage, and we have some wonderful practices which are on the internet. Actually, Caroline, I think, has one or two guided meditations that are very beautiful, very helpful. And then we have the fourth stage, which is the stage that we've been talking about, and I'm going to emphasize this fall, which is the jhana of somatic, the jhana of love and compassion, which is the Mahayana. So we're coming back now, and we're going to do some practice together, and once again exploring and deepening our sense of particularly the sitting meditation, the shikantaza, as the basis for developing the Mahayana. So please take a good meditation posture. Feel your back line as we did last week. It's as if there's a field of space in the area of your spine from your tailbone all the way up to your occiput, the bump on the back of your head. You can feel your physical spine as a way to tune in. So we're feeling our physical spine, we're feeling the space just in front of it. If you like, you can visualize it as a tube, which is often done in the Tibetan tradition. It's a tube that runs from your perineum, just below your tailbone, up along the inside of your body, just inside the spine, up to the occiput. And then again, breathing into the lower belly, picking a point roughly midway between the perineum and the navel toward the back of your body. Breathing into that point and letting the breath flow into the lower belly, and then a very incredibly subtle and gentle upward movement of the space of the central channel. As we're doing this, you can pay attention to your your spine and see where it might feel restricted. See if you can unlock that just a little bit. Using micro movements forward and back. Twisting a little bit might help you side to side. You really, right now, you're within the inner perception, the interoception of the central channel. Breathing into the lower belly, feeling the very gentle upward trend of the space in the central channel, the very slight blissful feeling of the occiput as the space moves through it. And trying to feel the whole scope of the corridor, this corridor of space, of awareness. Breathing into the lower belly, feeling the whole realm of transit up to the occiput and feeling the occiput. So it's one body you're feeling, one body of space. And then emptying out anything that is pushing in on it, which is going to be our thinking, our assumptions about this part of our body, anything that's pushing in, any restriction. You feel it somatically. You don't have to think about it. Empty, let go, empty, open, let go. And then as you do so, let the back of the head rise. On the in-breath, the breath moves up and the back of the head rises slightly toward the heavens, opening up further the corridor of space along the back line. So our core, this is the core of our state of being, is opening and becoming lighter, more transparent and free. And then dropping the chin slightly to further enhance the experience of the space in the central channel. And then the ears traveling back, so that as the chin drops, the head doesn't fall forward. Ears traveling back, they want to go toward the being over the shoulders. During all these instructions, this is all about the central channel. It's all about our unconditioned foundation, our eternal beingness. And then opening the back of the neck, a feeling of opening any restriction in the back of the neck so that the flow of the space, the awareness upward, is really unimpeded. And then eyes. Moving your attention from the front of the eye to the back, and the eyes need to be open to really do this. And then open the back of your eye into the space of the central channel. So the only thing that's looking is the space or the awareness of our basic nature. The ego is out of it completely. There's no intention whatsoever. It's totally soft gaze and then release into effortlessness. It's almost as if you're looking backward. And mouth, lips just slightly touching, and the tongue floating. And play with the tension in your jaw and your mouth, just very subtly. Play with the floating tongue and see how it further can open the space of the central channel. And then you have a whole body around the central channel. And now we're going to let that whole body relax. As the space moves upward, very gently, imperceptibly, there's a feeling of brightness in our basic nature. And as that brightness is moving upward, we become more and more surrendering into it and letting the whole body relax, the shoulders, the neck muscles, the chest, the muscles around the back, the whole entire body, because we are surrendering into the space of the central channel, the whole entire body begins to heave a sigh of relief and let go. And our body is being animated and is effortlessly upright because everything else relaxes around the space. Hands can be just lying on your lap. They can be folded, they can be cosmic mudra, Zen style, whatever feels comfortable. But again, everything you're doing with your body now is all about arranging it and allowing it to arrange itself around the space of the the back line, the central channel. Notice that when we're breathing into the lower belly and letting the breath just make its way up the central channel, there's feeling in our body, feeling about it. You can't make it out, but it's as if the space is bringing life into our body. Just flows out. And in particular, our heart begins to stand out very slightly. There's some feeling that our heart has about resting in the empty, open awareness of our eternal nature. And just feel that. So being in your body, breathing very gently, slightly into the lower belly, and feeling everything that you feel without comment or judgment. So I've taken a little bit of time to bring you into the what we call a posture of meditation, the shikantaza, posture of shikantaza, the posture of pure awareness. And I would like you to work with these instructions, and over time you'll be able to come into the posture in a very easy and organic way. What you're looking for, I think, is that these various points that I've mentioned become one single organic entity, one process, one somatic experience, so that when you begin to work with your central channel, the other things fall into place and you naturally do them. You naturally drop your chin, you naturally move your head back, you open the back of your neck, you're working with the other points of the posture. It's one thing, and at that point you can do it in just a few minutes. And then the practice, for those of you who don't know how we do it, in the practicing lineage is you sit, for 40 or 45 minutes, and you simply explore your experience, and you come back over and over and over into the interior domain of the body in the way that I've just been teaching you. In a quotation I love that Caroline found, Suzuki Roshi says, when you take this posture, you don't need to be looking for a further state of mind, because the posture itself is the state of mind. When you're doing this posture, practicing this posture, you are in the mind of the Buddha. In the beginning, for many of us, it's a bit of a mystery, but if you explore it, you'll find out that he's right. Very good. So I'd like you to work on this for the next week, and I'm going to ask Jessica to come back now, and let's take a look at some of the questions that have come in.
Thank you, Reggie. So our first question is from Montana, from Jamie in Montana. My question is a bit technical. I'm wondering, when you talk about the back line and the central channel, are these the same thing? Also, when I'm locating the central channel or back line, would you say it is on the area of the spine, closest to the skin, or would you say it is more interior, toward the inside of the body?
Yeah, the central channel it's inside the spine. It's not on the outside under the skin. You have the spine, and then you come in front of the spine. So it runs really from just inside the tailbone on the inside of the body up, as I said, and it pretty much follows the spine all the way up to the back of the head. In Tibetan yoga, and particularly in the practice of Tummo, the central channel is visualized as a very tiny channel, almost the size of a soda straw. And this has benefits because it enables you to be much more precise in the beginning with visualizing and feeling the space in the central channel. Even with the soda straw, when you get to the point where your mind's inside it, the space is very vast. But in the beginning it seems ridiculous, it's like a soda straw. How can I get my mind in there and feel the whole length of it? As you work with this, I call it a corridor space, because although you use in Zen Buddhism, in Taoism, in Tibetan Buddhism, in Hindu yoga, although you use specific visualizations to locate it, the visualizations are temporary measures, and at a certain point in our lineage, and certainly in the other ones also, you begin to realize that it's a more general kind of situation. It's actually space that lies behind the thinking mind, and we locate it in the body, but it's not restricted to that place. So no need to say more about it, but it's not quite as cut and dried as sometimes when you read these, particularly these Tibetan meditation manuals. It's not really all that cut and dried.
Thank you. Next we have two somewhat related questions about your instruction last week regarding the occiput.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is from Michael in Montana. And Michael says, "This was the first time I have worked with the occiput. Can you just speak a little about the occiput?"
Well, throughout our body there are various gates and there are various vortices. Our body, from all of the practice traditions, it's not. When you see the body from the inside, it doesn't correspond to a physiological anatomical chart. There may be certain correspondences, but basically it's a different situation. And one of the things you find is there are places where the space of the body expresses itself in, it's more manifest, there's more energy there, and the occiput is one of those places. It's very helpful because it has, breathing into it has a lot of impact on the immune system. There are other practices that we do where the energy goes up and over the head, and then there are other practices where the energy goes out the top of the head when you're dying and you're learning what's called powa. So it's just a way of working, and it gives you a reference point. It gives you a way to feel the upward flow and then have a point where it lands. It's just a useful technique. There's nothing anything particularly metaphysical about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a second question about the occiput from Andy in Australia. My question refers to the practice of resting back into the spine and breathing into the lower belly whilst feeling the energy in the central channel. Over the past few years, I have had periods of very strong energy up the central channel into the head.
Well, just one point here. Mm-hmm. I never said feel the energy in the central channel. Mm-hmm. A lot of people who have played around with Kundalini, it's about energy, and the central channel is not about energy, and this is something people really have to get clear on. If your assumption based on previous practice or books you read or whatever is that the central channel is about energy, you're going to run into problems. Definitely going to run into problems. And I want you to read the rest of the question, but he mentions his heart, And that's one of the problems you can run into. People who, we always say you have to contact the space of the soma first. You have to be familiar with the empty, open awareness that is your basic nature. And you need to spend a lot of time gaining that familiarity and that grounding. And this is, a challenge I run into. I ran into it at Naropa, I run into it in Dharma Ocean. People come in and they have all these things they do, and they're playing around with energy in their central channel. Meantime, it's, if the empty, open awareness is not your ground, then the default is ego, and you're going to be using and running energy through your system as a function of your ego and wanting to achieve certain goals and having certain ideas. It's really, really dangerous. And I'm not saying that, if you follow the instructions of meditation, and I would say any of the classical traditions, you're going to be fine. But the minute you start adapting them to your own ideas and trying to create your own personal meditation system, particularly if it involves energy, there are going to be problems. It's going to happen. So, I know I've said this before, even in the live streams, but I have to say it over and over and over, because we kind of have a default that meditation is a lifestyle choice, and some of these practices can enhance things that I like. And that doesn't really, particularly if you're working with energy, it isn't going to turn out well. But carry on, and let's hear about the heart.
Okay. The question continues. Over the past few years, I've had periods of very strong energy up the central channel into the head. Sometimes it flows freely, and the experience of expansion and wholeness is easeful and very powerful. At other times, there are periods of an intense blockage at the occiput with powerful headaches and a feeling of solidity. Last night I tried the practice for a session, and it had a very big response that was quite pleasurable with a strong expanding white light. Today the headache at the occiput is throbbing. I am very careful never to push during practice, as this was my habit in earlier years of meditation. Do you think this is a suitable practice to integrate these periods of intense fluctuation?
No. No, I wouldn't do it. Don't do it. I think there are a lot of assumptions here. There are a lot of agendas, and there's a lot of ambition. With all due respect to the questioner, and that we pretty much have to empty that out before we can actually work in an effective way with the central channel. And I would suggest to this questioner a lot of Mahamudra practice, which is practicing with basic space and beginning to discover that the fundamental nature of the body is basic space, and allowing the journey to emerge in a natural way out of that, not running energy, which is the dangerous thing, which I feel might be going on here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Our next question's from Amanda in Cambridge, England. And she says, "Thank you so much for sharing this teaching. Rinpoche has been calling for a while now, and I am so glad to find you. I feel part of the community, even though physically so far away. I struggle with discipline due to my upbringing, seeing it as a punishment, and I am finally able to enjoy my food and wine. What are your thoughts on abstinence as a necessity on the path?"
I'm more in favor of indulgence, frankly. William Blake says, and William Blake lived just down the road in London from you. He said, "You never know how much is enough until you know how much is too much." And I think, particularly when we have been brought up to distrust the normal joys and pleasures and happiness of human life, which most of us have, it's better to err on the side of indulgence than abstinence. And I think what happens when you do that is you begin to find the middle way. You begin to find how much is too much. And then there's if we listen to our body, when we are drinking wine, when we're eating food, when we are doing anything in life, the body will always notify us about how to find the sweet spot. The thing about overindulgence is that at a certain point you don't enjoy it anymore. And it's the ego basically trying to ramp up its pleasure. That's a problem. But even more of a problem is when we resist the natural inclinations and inspirations and appetites of human life, natural ones, not the neurotic ones. We resist those because we have some kind of belief that there's something wrong with them. That's much more of a problem, particularly in Western culture. I have a woman that I work with, I think I work with her, I'm not sure, I think we do, has adapted the body work into eating disorder treatment. And she's working with others. She healed herself from a severe eating disorder and is now healing other people. And basically what I'm getting from what she's telling me is something that I found out myself, but it's interesting to find people figuring it out, out there. We're working with these teachings, is that if you really listen to your body, you want something to eat and you feel this gnawing hunger, and the gnawing hunger can't be separated from some sort of emotional starvation. We all know that feeling, and if you come back and ask your body, what do you want? The body will tell you. The body will tell you. And often the body is, sadly enough, I think for our egos, the body is actually happier with a lot less food than our egos are, even if we're healthy and fit. The body will definitely let you know. And I think that would be my suggestion for working both with tendencies towards abstinence and tendencies towards too much indulgence, is see what your body has to say about it. Tune into it, tap into it. Go on the website, Dharma Ocean website, and look up the practice of somatic descent. And do it, and have a few sessions, and use that as a way to gauge yourself in whatever you're doing.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Our next question is from an audience member named Soul, and the question I have from the live stream this evening was regarding truly seeing people. In my experience, people frequently appear to not want to be seen. There is a kind of discomfort with being able to see them and meeting them at a place where it is clear the self they wish others to accept is fully transparent to me. They know it, and I'm uncertain how to interact with this kind of unwanted seeing in relationships. There are such different paradigms that when awareness comes into certain ones, it feels like it is not welcomed. Even a certain defensiveness or hostility arises, particularly to seeing.
Well, that's very tricky. Seeing other people can be very aggressive, and my experience is whenever we try to see, or we have the assumption that we can see into people, which is actually very arrogant in a certain way. When we come at people, I'm a very intelligent person. I have a tremendous amount of insight. This is what we're thinking, and I can see into you. I see what you're doing. I see what's going on. That's very, very aggressive, and that's not helpful. And people are right to be defensive and to feel invaded. In the 70s, when I grew up, we used to do this thing where we would, it was like bombs away, in the late 60s and 70s, in interpersonal work, and we would sit down and we would stare at each other. And this was reputed to be an experience of tremendous openness and connection. But what ended up happening was certain people, the more aggressive, sort of arrogant side of the human spectrum, would use it as a way to to be invasive and manipulate other people and to sort of scare them off and take advantage. Maybe the other person's the really open one, and meantime the person who's coming on with this "I see you," it isn't good. It's very dehumanizing actually for people. What we're talking about here is actually something very, very different. We're talking here about simply receiving the state of being of another person, receiving it. And that's why I don't really like the image of, I said before, it's not really seeing. It isn't seeing. It's receiving. It's feeling the state of being of the other. It's sensing. It is receiving into our body the beingness of this person in front of us. And that's something all people want. It's what babies, more than anything else, is what babies need. They need their state of being to be received without judgment, without discrimination, without evaluation, and without the visual sight. The visual sight they don't need. What they need is the actual somatic feeling that their state of being is being received by the mother or by somebody else. And everybody else, that's what everybody needs. And no one is ever going to feel defensive if you are simply there and their state of being is you're available. That's what we're doing. We're making ourselves available. So to the questioner, I really would kind of explore that boundary between seeing somebody else and receiving them, which is much more it's much more passive, frankly, from the ego standpoint. It's a very passive experience. You're present, but you're not doing anything at all, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Our next question is from Corey in Golden, Colorado. I would love to hear your comments on what's called the midlife crisis, when identity, relationships, and career feel hollow, and it's common to turn to alcohol, affairs, consumerism, or even spirituality to try to assuage the painful loss of meaning in life. How can we work with this dark night stage on the journey?
Well, I think if you're trying to assuage the pain, it's not going to work. But this, really, they call it midlife crisis. It really isn't quite a midlife crisis. It's, you grow up, you're a teenager, you're trying to figure out who you are, you're in your 20s, you're still trying to figure it out if you're like me. You begin to get some kind of angle on what you want to do, and then you start doing it, whatever it may be, and it might be a few things, and you're trying to build something, you're trying to build a life, you're trying to build an identity in the world, and this is a very, very important part of being a human being. We have to make our place in the world. We have to get out there with the shovel and the pickaxe, and we have to build our home, and then we have to begin to live within our home. But at a certain point, and it does happen often to people, late 40s, 50s, 60s, but it's an ongoing process when you start to realize that, as the questioner said, as Corey said, it's pretty hollow, it's pretty empty. And even though, the people you love are very, very important to you, and you may feel your work is, in some sense is creative and fulfilling, best case scenario, it's still, it's kind of empty when you get right down to it, and when you look at the whole situation, there's not that much happening. And it certainly doesn't fulfill any of the expectations, all of the hopes and wishful thinking we had when we were younger. It's a very natural point in life, and it's a very, very powerful point in life. If we are trying to, and it's extraordinarily painful also, and scary and frightening, because you feel the ground is slipping out from under you. But if we take it as an opportunity and an open door, then we're in business. Because if we bring the practice of meditation to that life stage, there's a huge amount to learn. And first we learn how compulsive and misguided we were in what we thought. And everybody, that's true of everybody, so it's nothing personal here. And then we start to see how everybody else who is still trapped in the kind of, I'm going to be happy, and I'm just going to keep pushing on it, and I'm going to make it happen, it's going to happen, I'm going to live, I'm going to be who I want to be, that kind of wishful thinking, which again is very human. We begin to have a tremendous amount of sympathy for that situation, which we ourselves are just beginning to see through. And it makes us much kinder, I think, to the overall human condition, to realize, wow, there's a whole setup, of how you're going to be happy, and it turns out it's not true. We become very tender, very sympathetic, toward this human condition of ours. And then as you get older, it keeps unfolding. The midlife crisis is actually an ego crisis of earlier life, and it never ends after that. And as you tend to age, over and over and over, you're letting go. And then, toward the end of life, potentially the most powerful period of our lives comes up, and then you really have to let go. I had a friend named Ujin Shempen who was Tibetan, who lived in Boulder, and he was here working with our translation group under Chogyam Trungpa, and he was a heavy smoker, and I think in his 40s he contracted lung cancer, and he didn't fight it. He didn't, beat himself up with wishful thinking and trying this, that, and the other, which pretty much we all do. It's so common in our culture. So the whole, I think from the midlife crisis until the end, it's all about using this tremendously powerful tool of meditation to meet the situation, which is a good one. It's good to grow. It's good to have to let go. It's good to have to see life in a bigger perspective. And in the end, it's an enormous blessing to understand that even death itself is part of the sacredness of life. And if we are using our spiritual practice to meet and open to and attain that kind of realization about being human, it's an unbelievable opportunity as things begin to slip away from us. Because more things slip away, the more the bright light of greater life begins to dawn in our state of being. So, very, very, very powerful time from midlife on, and one that we have the tools, and we should take full advantage of it, and not be fighting tooth and nail to keep feeling good when that's not really the order of the day, so to speak. Very good. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Reggie. And thank you all for joining us. If you are inspired to attend a Dharma Ocean retreat, please see our program calendar on the website. Our next public retreat at the Blazing Mountain Retreat Center in Crestone, Colorado, is with senior Dharma Ocean teacher Al Bloom. It's titled Silence, Overcoming the Age of Distraction. If you would like to explore more of Reggie's teachings online, we recommend the Dharma Ocean podcast. You can link to it under the teachings header on the website. Episode 126 was posted this week. It's a talk Reggie offered on the importance of the consort relationship in teaching the Vajrayana tradition. We look forward to connecting with you again when we gather next Thursday for another teaching with Reggie. And Reggie, on behalf of our global community, thank you.
It's my pleasure. And by the way, I'm trying to rev up some participants for the winter Daton that I'll be leading this winter. I will be senior teacher Neil McKinley, who's led Datons before, is teaching the first 2 weeks, and I will be teaching the second 2 weeks. And this particular program runs from roughly mid-December to mid-January. It's the one place in our tradition and in our community where we offer deep sitting. And I love this program because it's the most wonderful place to meet the practitioners in our lineage. So I hope everybody listening will consider that possibility. You can come for a week, you can come for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. So see if you can do it, and then we can meet in person.